I am Olivia, 22, and for as long as I can remember, my place in the house was the chair next to my younger brother Lucas's desk. Every exam season looked the same. He sat back with a pencil in his hand, while I explained full chapters he barely skimmed, and my own assignments waited in a pile on my bed. No one asked if I had the time. It was simply treated as part of my role in the family. My parents never questioned the routine. If Lucas had a test, they expected me to drop what I was doing and sit beside him until he understood the material. Lucas grew up assuming this was normal. When a teacher mentioned an upcoming quiz, he reacted by looking for me, not by opening his book. He would appear at my door without warning, worksheets in one hand and snacks in the other, already planning to sit until I carried him through everything. There were nights where I explained formulas while checking the clock, counting how many hours I had left to finish my university assignments. If I asked for a break, my parents repeated the same line about older siblings helping younger ones. Lucas took that as permission to depend on me completely. He skimmed summaries, skipped practice sheets, and waited for me to fill in the rest for him. Teachers occasionally called home and mentioned that Lucas needed to work independently. Instead of holding him accountable, my parents turned those reminders into pressure on me. They insisted I guide him better, even though the issue was never unclear instructions. The real problem was his refusal to practice anything on his own. One afternoon, after class, his math teacher stopped me outside and mentioned in a calm, almost casual tone that Lucas leaned on me too much. She said it slowed his learning and blocked him from building basic skills. Hearing that from someone outside the family made the situation feel different. It was the first time someone phrased what I had been living for years. I tried adjusting things after that. I scheduled times for tutoring, leaving the rest of the evening for my capstone project. It lasted 2 days before my parents told Lucas to ask for help whenever he needed it. Undoing the whole plan, Lucas immediately returned to sliding papers under my elbow or tapping on my bedroom door in the middle of my calls. During group assignments at university, I noticed something else. Lucas's classmates learned faster when I explained things. They took notes, asked follow-up questions, and actually used the methods I taught. They joked about Lucas having a built-in tutor, and a couple of them half-jokingly asked if I could help them before midterms too. Their request lingered in my mind longer than I expected. They tried, they prepared, they showed up ready to work. I realized I wanted my time to go to students who valued the effort, not someone who sat back waiting for me to carry every step for him. That quiet thought kept growing. If I was going to spend hours teaching, it needed to be by choice, not because the household treated my time as free labor. And that's when everything in our house slowly began to shift. I met 3 of Lucas's classmates in the university library the week before their next exam. They had stopped me after a lecture and asked if I could explain a few chapters they were struggling with. We chose a table near the windows, and before we even started, I made one rule clear. I would help them understand the material, but I would not be doing anyone's assignments. They agreed right away and opened their notebooks, already filled with questions they had written down. They worked through practice problems on their own, while I showed them where they were mixing steps or missing key points. Every time one of them solved something correctly, they marked the page and rewrote it cleanly to study later. Their efforts stood out because at home, Lucas never prepared anything before sitting beside me. While we went through examples, Lucas was at home waiting for me to walk into his room like usual. He had no idea I was in a different building teaching his classmates instead of him. By the time I got home, it was late, and my parents were standing in the hallway asking why Lucas had not been helped yet. They assumed I was studying in my room, not teaching for hours somewhere else. I told them I had been tutoring students who actually followed a schedule. They treated that explanation as unimportant and pointed out that Lucas struggled more than anyone. I reminded them that struggling was different from refusing to study. They brushed the comment aside just as Lucas walked into the room. He immediately blamed his drop in grades on the fact that I had not shown up earlier, as if my absence explained everything. I handed him the set of notes I had prepared a week earlier. They covered every topic his teacher had assigned. Lucas tapped the packet once, set it on his desk, and walked out. The notes stayed untouched the entire night while he wandered around the house, pausing outside my room every few minutes the way he always did when he wanted me to step in and finish the studying for him. The next morning, his classmates passed me in the hallway at university and waved excitedly. They told me the review session made the material finally make sense. After the exam, they found me near the vending machines and pointed out which questions matched the examples we had practiced. They laughed about how lucky they were to get similar formats. When Lucas returned home, he tossed his backpack near the stairs and announced that the test was unusually hard. He left out the part where he never opened the notes at all. When my parents saw him sulking, they pulled me aside and asked whether I had ignored him again. Lucas did not deny skipping the notes. He just shrugged. I explained the situation the same way every teacher would. I could teach concepts, but I could not make someone care about their own work. Lucas had every tool he needed. He simply wanted the shortcut he had been given for years, and this time I refused to give it to him. The exam results came out 2 days later. By lunchtime, 3 of Lucas's classmates had already sent me photos of their papers. Their scores were higher than anything they had earned earlier in the semester, and each picture had a short message about how the review sessions made the test manageable. They described which questions matched the examples we practiced, and how the steps we broke down helped them move faster during the exam. During class, their teacher handed back the graded papers one by one. She paused at the front before the lesson started and commented that several students had shown strong improvement. She pointed out better preparation, cleaner work, and steady practice. The room buzzed with energy as the students she mentioned compared their results. Lucas kept his paper face down the entire time. He pushed it to the edge of his desk and stared straight ahead, avoiding the conversation around him. When the bell rang, he left without speaking to anyone. His classmates walked out smiling and talking about the test, but Lucas walked past them with his backpack half-zipped. At home, he went straight to his room. The door clicked shut, and a minute later my parents called me downstairs. They stood at the dining table with his test in their hands. The score was much lower than last time. They held it out as if it were proof that I had failed him. I explained the same thing I always had. He had every set of notes, guides, and practice sheets I prepared. They did not accept that. They repeated that he struggled and needed more help. They ignored the fact that he had skipped every page of the packet I wrote for him. I opened my laptop and showed them the messages from the classmates who studied with me. Screenshots of improved results, thank you notes, everything. My parents hesitated. Seeing other students doing better with the same guidance made it harder to blame me. While they stared at the screen, Lucas stepped into the doorway. He didn't wait for anyone to speak. He accused me of holding him back by not sitting beside him the night before the exam. He acted like the last-minute session he wanted would have changed everything. I asked him if he reviewed the notes I made days earlier. He didn't answer. He just repeated that I was supposed to walk him through every chapter the way I always had. He treated that as the only acceptable form of studying. I reminded him that learning required him to participate. His classmates wrote questions, practiced problems, corrected mistakes, and tried again. Lucas waited for shortcuts. That was the difference. My parents started using the same line about older siblings helping younger ones. But this time I pushed back. I told them I was willing to help students who respected the work, not someone who wanted me to carry the full weight of their results. Lucas left the room again, but the air in the house felt different. For the first time, the usual pattern, Lucas avoiding effort, my parents blaming me, was not passing without question. The dynamic that had been unchanged for years finally showed the first crack. A week after the exam results, Lucas's teacher asked my parents to come in for a meeting. I heard the call from the hallway. The tone was steady, but the message was serious enough that my parents exchanged a quick look before agreeing to show up the next afternoon. They moved around the house quietly that evening, almost rehearsing how they would explain Lucas's latest score without admitting anything about his study habits. The next day I stayed home while they went to the school. When they returned, I listened from the living room as they recapped what happened. The teacher had laid everything out clearly. She pointed to missing assignments, half-finished worksheets, and the pattern of Lucas arriving unprepared for quizzes. She explained how Lucas often waited until the night before to start studying anything meaningful. She also mentioned that several classmates had shown remarkable progress lately. She praised their preparation and noted that someone had clearly helped them build better study habits. My parents shifted slightly in their seats at that part. They knew exactly who she was referring to, but did not acknowledge it. Lucas sat next to them during the meeting with his arms crossed. When the teacher asked about his routine, he responded with vague answers about trying and reviewing a little. When she asked more directly, he admitted he usually waited until the last minute. She reminded him that future coursework would only get harder, and that relying on someone else to catch him up was not a long-term plan. My parents attempted to defend him by bringing up all the years I had guided him. They made it sound like my help was part of his academic structure. The teacher interrupted gently and explained that support should add to a student's effort, not replace it. She emphasized that responsibility needed to shift to Lucas if he wanted to succeed. The ride home was unusually quiet. My parents were processing the fact that someone outside the house had finally said out loud what they had avoided for years. Lucas walked ahead of them when they got inside, went to his room, and shut the door hard. He stayed there the rest of the afternoon. I returned to my usual tutoring sessions that evening. Lucas's classmates arrived with their notebooks already open, ready to go over new material. They kept pushing themselves with each session, writing clearer notes, solving more problems, and asking stronger questions. One afternoon near the campus bookstore, the mother of one of the students I tutored stopped me. She explained that her daughter's confidence in math had grown so much that she no longer avoided homework. She thanked me for the time I had spent with her. As I walked away, I realized something had changed. Tutoring wasn't a burden anymore. It wasn't something forced on me by family rules. It was something I chose, something I was good at, and something that gave real results, unlike the years spent trying to drag Lucas through chapters he never wanted to learn. With another exam cycle getting closer, 3 of Lucas's classmates sent me messages asking if I could start review sessions earlier this time. They wanted to cover the new units before the teacher moved into harder work. I arranged a schedule that matched my university classes, making sure everything fit without cutting into my own assignments. The sessions filled quickly, and soon almost every student in that group had added their name to the list. At home, my parents noticed the times I blocked off on the calendar. They watched me packing my notes before leaving for campus and asked why I kept rearranging my week for other students when Lucas needed the most support. I told them the guide I wrote for Lucas covered every chapter he needed and that all he had to do was use it. They shook their heads and insisted he needed step-by-step help, not written instructions. I explained that my own university workload was heavier now and that I could not drop everything the way I used to. Lucas tried to study alone for 2 evenings. He sat at the table flipping pages but barely read anything. He paced the living room, then circled back to the table without opening the packet. My parents watched him struggle and kept urging me to step in, but I repeated the same reminder. The guide was on his shelf, untouched. He eventually picked it up. He stared at the first page, turned a few more, then set it down again and wandered off to check his phone. By the end of the night, the packet was back on the shelf, still crisp and unused. Meanwhile, the study group on campus grew fast. Students showed up early and filled nearly every chair in the lounge. They brought their own practice sheets, not blank ones waiting for me to walk them through. I stood at the whiteboard, going through examples, and they copied every step, asking where they went wrong or how to solve specific patterns. Their effort showed in the way they organized their notebooks and corrected their mistakes without being pushed. Several students commented that the way I explained things made topics they once avoided suddenly manageable. They marked pages with tabs, rewrote solved problems, and practiced during breaks between classes. Back at home one afternoon, Lucas overheard me scheduling another session. He muttered under his breath that I spent more time helping other people than my own brother. I told him plainly that learning required participation. Anyone, family or not, who showed effort would get the same time from me. Someone waiting to be carried through chapters would not. My parents tried to remind me of the household expectation that I guide Lucas before every exam, but I answered calmly. The expectation had been one-sided for years, and it had never been fair. As exam week approached, the difference became clear. My students reviewed new material each day, comparing notes and solving extra questions. Lucas, meanwhile, sat at the dining table with his pencil tapping against the empty margin of his book, still hoping everything would make sense without him doing the work. Exam day came quickly. Lucas's classmates met me outside the building with calm expressions and stacks of neatly organized notes. They had rewritten every major formula, marked practice problems with colored tabs, and even compared answers before walking in. Their preparation showed in the way they carried themselves. Lucas arrived a few minutes later. He clutched the same packet I made weeks earlier, the corners still perfectly straight. He flipped through pages without stopping long enough to understand anything. His foot tapped against the floor while he scanned random lines, trying to absorb several chapters in the last moments before the doors opened. After the exam, the hallway filled with chatter. My study group walked toward me in a small crowd, pointing out questions that looked almost identical to the problems we practiced. They broke down which sections they solved quickly and which ones required extra steps. Their relief was clear in their voices. Lucas passed by without slowing down. His eyes stayed forward, and he didn't acknowledge anyone. It was obvious he had recognized how unprepared he was the moment the test began. Grades were released 2 days later. My group sent quiet updates, photos of their papers, each one showing improvement. A few of them circled their scores before sending them, proud of their progress. Later that afternoon, the teacher posted an announcement praising the class for showing stronger initiative this cycle. She noted that several students had taken clear steps to improve their study habits. Lucas came home after school with his paper folded in half. He placed it face down on the dining table and walked away. When my parents turned it over, the score showed another drop, lower than the last one. It formed a clear pattern that could no longer be explained by excuses or bad luck. Meanwhile, my students had earned some of the highest scores in the class. The contrast between their results and Lucas's only underlined everything that had been happening for months. Effort created progress. Avoidance created decline. My parents attempted to direct their frustration toward me again. They reminded me that family should come first, that I should have made Lucas the priority. I repeated the same explanation I had given since the start. Preparation only works when the person actually participates. Lucas had ignored the notes, skipped practice, and hoped for a shortcut. Lucas overheard the conversation and reacted sharply. He claimed the exam was unfair and accused his classmates of having advantages simply because I had helped them. I clarified the difference. The group used my explanations as tools, not replacements for their own work. Lucas wanted me to carry every step for him. My parents didn't have a response this time. The results were too clear. They could no longer defend a system that had failed as soon as I stopped doing the work for him. That evening, the phone rang. Lucas's teacher explained that moving forward, Lucas would be expected to demonstrate independent study habits. External reliance would not be accepted anymore. It marked the first official shift in the expectations placed on him, and the first time someone outside the house said the same thing I had been saying for years. After the call from Lucas's teacher, the house stayed unusually quiet for 2 days. No one asked me to step in, and no one placed worksheets on the dining table. Lucas didn't hover near my door like before. He spent most of his time in his room, and every once in a while I saw him walking from the hallway to the kitchen carrying the study guide I wrote. On the third evening, I passed the dining area and saw him sitting with the packet open. He wasn't flipping through it randomly the way he used to. He traced each line with his finger, reading slowly. My parents walked by him several times but didn't call me downstairs. They watched him work, unsure of whether to interrupt or pretend they weren't noticing. It was the first time in years that the house wasn't expecting me to take a seat beside him. My tutoring sessions continued as normal. I set 2 more meetings before the semester ended, and the group came prepared with new worksheets they printed on their own. One student showed me a revised notebook, filled with rewritten steps from our last lesson. Another mentioned planning to apply for an academic scholarship now that math no longer felt like an obstacle. Each session moved faster because they were building on work they had done earlier. At home, my parents asked if I planned to keep tutoring after graduation. Their tone was different this time. Instead of sounding annoyed, they sounded curious about what I wanted. I explained that helping students who actually tried had become something I enjoyed, and that I liked seeing real progress from people who put in effort. They listened without pushing back. When the morning of the final exam arrived, Lucas left the house earlier than usual. He carried a folder filled with handwritten notes. His notes, not mine. He had copied formulas onto index cards, marked pages with sticky tabs, and added question marks next to topics he planned to revisit. It wasn't perfect, but it was the first sign of independent work. At the exam building, my tutoring group approached me again. They talked through different sections of the material and checked last-minute details with each other. Their confidence stood out in the way they organized their time and compared solved problems. Later that day, Lucas returned home and placed his test neatly on the table. He didn't hide it. He didn't rush away. He simply set it down and walked to his room. When my parents turned the paper over, the score showed improvement. Not dramatic, but enough to prove he had actually studied. They called me into the kitchen. Instead of scolding or complaining, they acknowledged the truth that had been building for months. I had carried responsibilities that didn't belong to me. Lucas needed to continue on his own, and it was time to let him do that. Nothing in the house changed overnight, but the pressure that had followed me for years finally shifted. Lucas began studying alone. My parents stepped back, and for the first time, my time belonged to me, spent on students who wanted to learn, not on someone waiting to be rescued.